Happy International Women's Day. Although the pendulum of equality and freedom for women across the world swings wildly and not often the way we want, it's important that we keep looking ahead, buoyed by the victories big and small, and propelled forward by the mountains we will yet conquer. This year, we're coming together to inspire inclusion by asking the world to invest in women, accelerate progress. What better way to invest in women and accelerate progress than by getting gender governance right? That's why on this episode of the X and Y Convos, I'm with Andidiong Okon and we're discussing the ABCs of gender governance. Andy is a gender governance expert, among many other things, and she's worked with state and non-state actors to make governance work for women. She currently serves as program director at Public Digital. In this episode, Andy helps us to understand that everyone can and should institute successful gender-responsive governance, and she's got the receipts to show it's possible. And yes, we're talking to you governments and corporates.
So it is such a pleasure to be able to pull you away from your very busy schedule to get you to have this conversation with us on the X and Y Convos. And honestly, I really wanted to give this edition a different title. I really wanted to give this episode a different title, but I had to change my mind because I thought, before people are like, why is this person insulting us? So I didn't want to use that
Wait,
title.
what was this title?
Okay, so I was going to say gender governance for dummies. And this is why. It's because I thought, look, it's obvious that there are obvious inequalities in our society.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the impact of it. You see, so it's one thing to say, it's like the climate change energy, that one of the biggest challenges to people getting in is because it's not so obvious. It's not so in your face. But this is not the case. This is your mother. This is your sister, your daughter. You can't walk out of your house, even if you live in an all-male apartment, you can't walk out of your house and not see a woman and not see the impact of the imbalance in our society. I think that we're going to make it really simple and we're going to start from the real basics. What is gender governance?
Okay, in the simplest way, since you said I should make it really simple, gender governance is basically like how government develops a strategy that can help them make better decisions around spending and services rendered to citizens, taking into consideration both men and women so that they're able to achieve gender equality. Yeah.
So the first alarm that will go off in people's head is, hey, we're talking about, inequality, and you still say, oh, they have to make it men and women. Why is it men and women? Why is it not just the disadvantaged part of society?
I think primarily because before we get into the nitty-gritty, in basic terms, even when you're filling out a form, it's typically male or female, even though now we have a variety of genders.
Okay.
That's a whole other topic. But typically. So on surface level, just by face value, you're considering both men and women before we go into marginalized groups. And the goal is really about giving both men and women the same power to actually shape society and shape their own lives. That's really what gender governance is chasing after. Because a lot of the time you see women tend to be the ones in these conversations, like this is us having this conversation, when it should be a room full of people, both male and female, that are talking through why gender equality matters. Let it not just be women at the forefront advocating for this, but there needs to be a clear understanding across genders as to why this is important and what value women actually add to society. Yeah.
So, and I totally agree with you that it's a conversation that should be happening across board. It's not because what we're seeing is that because it appears to be so specialized, we have over specialized gender equality. And now it appears as if, that's your issue, so you guys need to figure it out and deal with it. And I think that spills over even into what that then means. It becomes easy for a parliament that doesn't have women to say, well, we don't have women to speak to these issues. Since it's a women issue, we're just going to leave it.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, so how do we begin to do gender governance? Putting in consideration our own context, Nigeria, Africa, how do we even begin to approach it?
Okay, so there's something called gender mainstreaming, and if you let me, I'll read the definition and then probably explain it.
Yes.
So gender mainstreaming basically involves the integration of a gender perspective into the preparation, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies and regulatory measures and the spending programs with a view of promoting equality between men and women and combating discrimination. So that's a very general statement that goes into the nitty gritty. It helps you understand that the best way to approach it is not just from the point of the marginalized groups, which are
Right.
women and other people with disabilities, young people as well. Those are some of the marginalized groups in the society. And like you have rightly said, it should not be only us having the conversation.
Right.
But the way to influence this change is by institutionalizing it first. And that's basically what gender mainstreaming and advocates for, because it's integrating how you implement, what policies you've put in place, your
Right.
legal frameworks, design and implementation, how you actually create this into your society through governance.
Right. Okay. So if it's this
I hope that
clear.
was simple enough. by the
Oh
way.
yeah, I think I think it pretty was. I mean, it's simple. Look, it's not just a one person problem.
Yeah.
It's a societal problem, and so
Yes.
we should approach it from this lens. One will think that the definition is simple. The Even though the enormity of the assignment is heavy, but
Mhm.
the approach appears simple. What is the biggest challenge to institutionalizing this? And I want us to speak specifically to the Nigerian context
Yes.
and then generalize to Africa. Because if it is this simple, it feels as if the president can just be like, okay, health minister, come, let's have a conversation. Where is it? What's the state in your sector? What's happening? Okay, let's institute this and make it work. It feels like it should be that easy, but obviously it's not.
So like we started, the biggest thing is the misconceptions around it. First, we're in a patriarchal society, and in recent times, women have been able to empower themselves, whether it's through gainful employment, skill building, entrepreneurship. And to a certain extent, I think men feel threatened, especially with the way some people do advocate for feminism. So anything speaking around gender equality, there's just the blocker, there's the bridge, because they're thinking about it as another angle of feminism, and
Right.
feminism has been feminism gets a bad rap. I
It
mean, it's
does
like
get a
a
bad
broad
rap.
spectrum
Yes.
of things, and it's really, there are a lot of people in the society we come from. I tend to tell women that you can't help but be feminist. When you think about yourself on the road, if you're in a car, the first thing anybody's going to say as a woman is that it's a man that bought it for you. People
Right.
don't, even when you're a high achiever as a woman,
Right.
they're going to attribute it to, oh, there's somebody that she slept
Absolutely.
with, there's somebody, yeah. So it's hard in our society, it tends to be hard for people to conceive in their minds that women can actually achieve things by their own self. So
Right.
that's the first thing we need to think about, how to break that misconception,
Right.
and also to approach it as a conversation, an inclusive conversation. So not a situation of where we're always thinking about women versus men, but it is women and men for a greater good. And also approaching it from the perspective of sustainability, because when you think of gender equality and equity, and when you think of the sustainable development goals, that's a key thing in achieving sustainability and inclusion in the long term as an economy.
Okay, so these are the barriers. Now, right now, and I don't see how this is not linked, that there are not a lot of, because the one thing that I have always felt, aside from all of the obvious barriers, it's also that there are not enough women who know enough in the places where decisions are being made to say, hey, this is really how you should be thinking about this. What that implies is that because this is not something that a group of citizens can just do, obviously. This is not, I mean, we will try, and there are conversations where we would have what you can do as a woman, how you can check some of these challenges and, kind of overcome, all that broad spectrum. It exists. But when it comes to the way we have defined gender governance, it's not something that I can just gather a few women in my compound or a few of my neighbors and say, hey, Mr. Bola, Mr. Kich, come, let's do this. It kind of then implies that it is going to be a lot harder if we don't have women in the room where these decisions are being made. And this is it. Not because men are bad. And that's one thing I try to tell people. They don't have our point of view. we were having a funny conversation. So Dataphyte did a story about menstruation and the challenges with menstruation.
Yeah.
And it was a guy that wrote it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I teased him and I said, do you know what menstrual cramp feels like? It's one thing to read, the stomach contracts, and it's a whole other level to feel your stomach actually doing that. And if you take it from that lens, it means then that because men don't have the point of view that we have, they've not lived those pain points. It's a lot harder to remember.
Yeah.
And so how do we then do it when we don't have women in these decision-making capacities?
It's funny you mentioned the menstrual cramps thing, because recently I think on social media I've seen where they've tried to simulate it for men. So they put like those little pads that are connected to some wires.
I think I saw one of those.
For them to experience.
Yeah.
I guess that helps to give some perspective around it. But just because when you think about most things in life, you don't have to experience things.
True.
It's a matter of empathy. At this point, this now speaks to your humanity.
Right.
It's a matter of empathy. What is your understanding? If women are consistently speaking about this thing and struggling, and it's not about taking away from you.
Yes.
It's about being open enough to understand, to ask questions, to get a better sense of it. And that's why when we're talking about gender mainstreaming, one of the things that was mentioned is the design.
Right.
So at the point where you're designing whatever government intervention it is you want to have, whatever programs and policies you're considering, it's useful to have all the different stakeholders in the room.
Right.
So women, it can be young women, older women, women doing business, for example, because that's one that's very peculiar to the work I do around gender responsive procurement. So it's about getting all the stakeholders that need to be a part of the conversation come in the design phase, because you could build a program that with the best of intentions, but it doesn't deal with the pain points of women or the pain points of young people and other marginalized groups. And so that's where you tend to see that disparity between what is designed. Example of what I ordered versus what I got.
Exactly.
But yeah, so that's basically what it is, in the sense that consideration has to be, everybody has to have a seat at the table at the point of designing it.
Right.
And then there has to be a clear agreed plan in achieving this long term. So you may have a short term plan and then a long term plan, because sensitization is the biggest part of what it is. Reorientation, that's something else that we call change management, because when we talk about it at governance level, you now also have to think about the foot soldiers, the government officials that are actually the civil servants, who are going to execute. So you have to think of change management. It's like shifting them from something they've always been used to. That I tend to speak about my work, shifting them from like a paper-based system to a digitized system. People just think, oh, in concept, that is an excellent idea. It saves them time. They don't have to put in as much effort in pushing files or searching for things. But you haven't actually taught them the how, or given them an understanding of the why they're going about it. So those are some of the areas that need to be addressed for it to be achieved.
I'm glad that you mentioned your work. It gives me like a good pivot point as we begin to wrap up. And it's that, do we have examples of uptake of gender governance, maybe within our space or maybe outside of our space? And then what lessons can we draw to say, okay, this worked, so we can scale this, or this did not work, and so we need to rethink this?
Okay. Yes, we have examples. So in Nigeria, on a project I've been working on in gender responsive procurement, which you can consider as one of the different tools within the whole gender mainstreaming concept. You can consider gender responsive procurement. And for those that are not familiar with the terminology, it's just about doing business with the government more inclusive for women-owned businesses and other marginalized groups. Because, for instance, women-owned businesses tend to fall into small businesses. So when you're addressing issues around women-owned businesses, you're ultimately addressing issues for small businesses. So it makes doing business with government more inclusive for small businesses. So I just needed to give that
Thank
overview.
you. We needed to learn that
overview. But basically, we've done that in Ekiti State. We worked closely with Ekiti State in making their procurement system more inclusive. So they wanted to increase the participation of women in winning contracts by 5%. So when we started the project, we carried out a survey, and over 60% of women did not know anything about the
How
procurement
to-
process, how to
right.
go about registering and all of that. So we carried on for about 18 months, a sensitization exercise, capacity building, engaging with government, reviewing the procurement manual, and to include guidelines around making it inclusive for women-owned businesses. And then we also went the extra mile to build the capacity of the procurement officers in the different ministries, departments, and agencies. And we've basically wrapped up that project and are about to tell the story of the project, so
Okay.
you get a good preview. But
Thank you.
when we started in Ekiti State, there were only about 30 women-owned businesses registered to do business with the government. But now that we're wrapping up, we have over 150 women-owned businesses that have now registered and are doing business with the government. And we have seen women-owned businesses now win contract with the government.
Okay.
And even in a space, typically the few that were registered tend to win contracts around food and catering and that sort of thing. But now we're seeing them winning in consultancies, in works as well, in more capital intensive projects, because they have a better understanding and can position themselves to compete better.
I feel like if I ask you, you would have some horror stories about this work, but let's not talk about the horror stories.
Yeah.
Tell me something that really inspired you, a moment where you felt like, okay, so this can work. So all of the effort is not down the drain. It's actually working and it's scalable.
I think the moment for me was when, so we had worked on the team in developing radio jingles for in Yoruba, in English, and in the Ekiti State dialect as well. And the response, I think the reaction to that, and we put it over radio. So it was also important because there's graphics, there's all of that, but you still want to reach the grassroots,
where they consume information.
Exactly.
Right.
So the response to that, we saw people trooping into the Bureau of Public Procurement to just know this thing that we've been hearing on the radio. We want to be able to have these opportunities to contribute to our community, to be able to do business with the government. How do we go about it? And we just saw women coming in droves and in large numbers, and it was just so inspiring to see. And something else that was so inspiring for me was also the team in Ekiti. They're very upwardly, that conception of civil servants being lazy and they actually broke that. And for a small state where there isn't as much going on compared to certain other states, they were very impressive in putting together their work plan, their project plan for the year, putting together their reporting systems. They have a very efficient system. There's still a lot of learning going on, of course, but there's a passion there and there's a commitment. It's not the situation where once it's 4 o'clock, you know how they say for civil servants,
we're going home.
Once it's 4 o'clock, we're going home.
Right.
I have sat through meetings with this team till like 7 p.m., 8 p.m. in their offices, and they're working. It's not just them waiting and listening to me, but they're actively
in that process.
investing and seeing results. So those are some of the inspiring moments, because it also breaks certain misconceptions even about the government. So I was very happy to see that.
I mean, I've always thought that if things are really going to change in Nigeria, I think that we do need to work with that civil service structure to kind of optimize it and make the mammoth move. Thank you so much. I feel like we've just gone through ABCs of good governance in about 20-25 minutes. So thank you so much, Andy, for taking the time to talk to us and just engaging with, helping us to know better. Because honestly, when we started this conversation, I thought, I don't know what Andy's going to tell me to convince me that this thing is going to work or can work. But now,
so why
I am convinced. But now I am convinced.
I'm happy to hear that. It's a work in progress. I think it's we shouldn't just always think that there's some magic key that's going to fix everything, but there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done. Like you said, the civil service is like a behemoth, and it's the bedrock of any successful. So you might have people in leadership, but if the civil service is not on board, it's not going to work. It might kick off initially, there might be some energy, but then it would lose
especially
momentum.
if there's some grants involved, you know.
Zipping lips on that.
But thank you so much, Andy. It's been such a pleasure having this conversation with you on the X and Y Convos. And I'm hoping to drag you back in to talk about, I mean, I
What will be
personally
the topic
want.
this time?
I promise it won't be anything inflammatory. I promise. But I really would like to hear your own journey in navigating this, living in an inequitable society and what that means. So I'm looking forward to dragging you back in to have that conversation. But thank you very much for your time.
Nigeria. Thank you for having me here. I'm really happy to have had this conversation. And this is my first time on a podcast. So this is
we're
this is
excited.
interesting for
Thank
me.
you.
So thank you very much.